Okay, so we had Senator McLucas channeling Senator Polley before, and now we have Senator Siewert channeling Senator Ludlam. Is that how it works?
That's right, yes.
Okay, Senator Siewert.
Thank you. I'd like to ask some questions about the National Partnership Agreement on Homelessness. I bet you couldn't have guessed that's what I'd be asking about. First off, I understand that the Minister, Mr Andrews, has said that we need to wait till after the budget on any further announcements. Is the government not going to be doing anything on making any announcement on the partnership agreement before May? And
sorry, Senator, what is the basis for the understanding that Minister Andrews has said?
Minister Andrews said on the 23rd of February, the government understands the community sector is seeking clarity and will work to ensure there is certainty as soon as possible, but all significant funding decisions must follow the budget process, and these decisions will be announced in May.
Senator, I think that what we'd add to that is that clearly there's a budget process, and there's also, we're very aware that people have asked for a decision to be communicated as soon as possible, and people have talked about, March, April to allow service providers time, and I think the Minister's aware of that, and so the fact that it's in the budget process doesn't mean that the decision won't be communicated before that time. So it's in the budget process, but there obviously is facility to make announcements before the budget.
Okay. So does that mean that you will be letting organisations know that they're likely to have continued funding?
Well, it's a decision for government, Senator, but I think the Minister's trying to convey that it is in a budget process. The situation we're in is that the transitional NPAR did not receive ongoing funding, so it's classified as a terminating initiative. So there's no money in the forward estimates, and so the government's got to have a process to consider what we'll do.
I appreciate that, but I'm still, somewhat confused by your answer. I know for a fact that in WA there's organisations that are looking at closing their doors, and I'm sure that's repeated around the country. They're looking at closing their doors way before we get to May. So does that, from your first answer, do I take it that there will be some form of improvement in certainty for organisations to know whether there will be some funding or not?
Senator, what we're saying is that the government is aware of these issues, and there are precedents for decisions to be announced pre-budget in certain circumstances.
Okay.
As yet, government hasn't taken a decision on that.
Right, okay. Given that I'm told that in March some of these organisations are going to have to be making the decision, I presume the Minister is aware of the very restricted time in which these organisations will be having to make these decisions.
Yes, Senator.
Okay, thank you. Does that... So I understand that what you've just said. Will that enable some further negotiation with the organisations once that, if a pre-budget decision is made? Will then the follow-up to that be some negotiation with these organisations? So the decisions made doesn't necessarily mean that the organisations that are currently getting funded will have their funding continued. Do you see that I'm not trying to split hairs here? There's the big picture announcement, and then there's the working with the organisations. Is that able to occur before, at least starting it, is that able to occur before May?
It really depends on the decision the government takes, Senator.
Yeah,
Senator, I think most of the organisations involved are actually funded from, Mr Palmer will correct me, funded by state governments. So we have a relationship with state governments, and the state governments are the funder. Okay. And so we are in regular contact with chief executives of state housing authorities or the relevant authority, keeping them abreast of where things are at. And so what would happen would be, when a decision is taken, it would be communicated, and then that process would happen.
Okay, so they'll be communicating with their relevant state agencies, is that?
They will, I think, for the most part. Mr Palmer will correct me if I'm wrong.
Okay, thank you. In WA, the partnership funds 41 different bodies to provide at least 80 different support services. Are they all going to be able to be addressed during that timeline, or that all those issues have a degree of certainty one way or the other by the time that they have to start laying off staff?
Brian Palmer, Group Manager, Housing, Homelessness and Gambling Group. Senator, my understanding is that each of the states and territories have a 3-month requirement with notification requirement with the services they fund.
Right, okay.
It would depend on how processes run and the decision the government comes to on what notification would be possible from the Commonwealth.
Okay, thank you. In terms of negotiations with the various states, where are those negotiations up to?
Until, without a government decision, it's not possible to enter into specific negotiations, but we've had ongoing discussions with states and territories.
Okay, I should have used discussions,
around the different approaches they're taking and where they're at.
Are you, I'm interested in all the states, but I'm being a bit parochial here about my home state in Western Australia. Have you had any discussions with Western Australia?
Typically when we've spoken with the states and territories, we've spoken with them in multilateral forums, and Western Australia has been present.
So at multilateral...
The most recent discussion last week
Yes.
was in Western Australia, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Okay, so that was so the discussions you've had with all the states have been in multilateral discussions rather than on a one...
No, just...
It's just my home state?
Just the most recent discussion, which
Okay.
happened to be multilateral,
Right.
was in Western Australia last week.
Okay, so presumably, therefore, you were talking to the West Australian government. Okay, thank you.
They often turn up at meetings in their state. Not always, though.
That's interesting. I may pursue that at another time. In terms of the priority being put on this, do I take from the comments that you've made previously, and I'll address it to you, Mr Pratt, that this is high in the government's list of priorities to resolve?
I think that's a fair characterisation.
Okay. Does that mean, I'm aware that resolution of the issue may be a priority, but does that mean homelessness is high in the government's priority? To say, I'm not trying to split hairs here. You may be trying to resolve it to just say no, and I'm not putting words in your mouth there, but does that mean homelessness is high in the government's priority?
Certainly the government regards homelessness as a priority.
Okay, thank you. Is this the funding part of this process part of the Commission of Audit?
I assume the Commission of Audit is looking at this area, but I don't know.
So you weren't required, I don't want to rehash all the discussions that we've had previously on the Commission, but you presumably provided information to the Commission on this, on homelessness?
Well, as I was saying earlier, we've provided information on virtually everything that we do.
Okay.
What the Commission of Audit is actually focusing on, though, I don't know.
Okay, and you haven't been specifically asked by the Commission to provide further information on this?
Well, not personally, no, but...
I mean the department.
But in terms of the department, I don't know, and I probably wouldn't answer if I did know.
So you probably wouldn't?
No. Apologies, Senator.
Right. I'm aware of time, so I'll move on rather than pursuing that.
Are you moving into a different section?
No, still on homelessness. Yeah. And the partnership. How many FTEs, or sorry, staff, I should say. I hate talking about FTEs, but how many staff members that are the equivalent of full-time FTEs or full-time equivalents are there working on this particular arrangement, this particular issue?
On homelessness?
Yeah.
Senator, We have 24 people currently working within the homelessness branch on the range of homelessness issues.
Sorry, how many?
24.
24. For some reason I thought you said 27. 24. Is this different? Is this the same number as was previously under Faxia? Is it
It's a smaller number, Senator.
small? By how much?
We had in the numbers I have here for June 2013 was 50 people.
50. Under Faxia.
Yep.
Just so that I don't go off half-cocked, is there... That's half. Are those people not working on homelessness anymore, or are they in another...
Senator, the area, the way it might be come about by the way we divide the functions within the
That's
group.
where I was going,
Yeah.
just to be clear, yes.
So we divide out functions like research, and we divide housing policy, and yet there's very strong interactions between those pieces of work in the one group. So I think that, and then we also have some separate policy capacity in the family violence area, which sits in another area of the department. And so I think probably that we would say we've got plenty of guns on the issue. We haven't reduced our effort, but
I'd come at this from another way, Senator. You should not assume that the change in numbers is solely due to efficiency dividends. It's a combination of things. Different areas of the department grow and shrink depending on what workload they have on. There have been structural changes in the way in which we have done things like managing programs and policy work and research, as Mr. Lai has just covered. And just in terms of the cycle of work, sometimes we move resources from one location to another and then back again or to another place.
Okay, I suppose therefore that, the obvious response to that one is if it's on a cycle and priorities, I would have thought you'd need if at the moment you're basically in the process of developing the new agreement, that would take a fair amount of resources to finalise.
Well, as the officers have indicated, we're not yet at the stage where we might enter into negotiations, and if we do enter into negotiations, then we might revise our staffing numbers.
Senator, it's a bit to do with the way the agreement's struck too, where it's not like another area where we're directly funding NGOs and have a amount of work that comes from being having that direct interface with the non-government sector. In this case, we're dealing with just the jurisdictions essentially, and so that's a different sort of workload. It requires complex, and it requires people to think, obviously, but it's a different order of workload.
Okay, thank you. I've got just a few more in this particular area. As part of the ongoing consideration of the next phase, are you also looking at the specialist services that were part of the last process? And I'm thinking of, for example, homelessness and domestic violence. Are those sorts of programs also still in the mix for consideration?
It's probably worth explaining a little bit of history here, Senator. If we go back to 2007, a large number of homelessness services were funded under the old SAP, Supported Accommodation Assistance Program, and the old CAP program, Crisis Accommodation Program. Those funds were rolled into the National Affordable Housing Specific Purpose Payment from, I think it was from 2009, from January 2009. So the homelessness services that were part of that agreement that were rolled in are continuing. That's part of the National Affordable Housing Specific Purpose Payment.
Right.
On top of that, and it's a bit hard to say, but if you said that how much money was rolled in today's terms, it's in the order of $250 million ongoing in the base of the National Affordable Housing Specific Purpose Payment that is dedicated towards homelessness services. In the National Partnership Agreement, and a lot of those services, to get to your question, were services for domestic violence, refugees, those sorts of services. There is some 39 initiatives of the 180 initiatives in the National Partnership Agreement on Homelessness that are also directed towards domestic violence, refuges and those types of services.
So will that process continue?
The National Affordable Housing Specific Purpose Payment is an ongoing payment and is not being changed at any point at this moment.
Thank you. I also note that at the same time that the Minister made the comments on the 23rd of February about the budget process, he also made comments about the responding more effectively to the causes of homelessness. Can you take me through what that means and whether that work is part of this ongoing, the future considerations of the agreement?
The Minister flagged both before the election and since the election that the government wants to look at the effectiveness of the National Affordable Housing Agreement and the way we measure the full range of services, including homelessness services that are funded under that agreement. And as part of that consideration and part of improving transparency and effectiveness, we'd be looking at homelessness services. In his speech to the National Affordable Housing, the National Australian Housing Conference the National Housing Conference in November, he sought and asked for people to write to him with views, if they have views on how those programs could be improved, and that's the stage we're at the moment. It's a consultation phase at the moment.
The undergoing consultation process, okay.
Yep.
Thank you. I might just...
But there are other questions around the National Partnership and Homelessness, so we might just do those. Is that...
Yes,
so
okay, yes,
we'll
and
do,
I've got two more after that.
We'll do Senator McLucas and then Senator Seselja.
Chair, Senator Siewert has covered the substance. I just want to go to what I think I've learned out of that conversation, and that there is an indication that there will be an answer around funding coming soon, but there has been no work to negotiate the National Partnership Agreement on Homelessness. Is that an accurate observation about the work the department's done in this space?
Senator, I think what we'd say is that we are having an ongoing, it's not a negotiation, but we've had ongoing discussions with states and territories in this space.
So, Minister, have you met with your state and territory counterparts to start a conversation about negotiating a new national partnership on homelessness?
I haven't, but it's not part of my core portfolio responsibilities.
I'll come back to that. So has Minister Andrews.
Minister Andrews has had discussions with his counterparts. I couldn't tell you how many of them.
But not in a formal ministerial council type.
That's correct.
Meeting.
That's correct. Just going back to your previous summary, though, Senator, the government is yet to take a decision on what it might do in terms of future homelessness funding, and also when it might announce that decision. So these things are still, from our purposes, still up in the air quite a bit. So I'm not sure that we can guarantee that there will be an announcement very soon. Mm-hmm. But the government is certainly aware of the issues which are very high in the minds of homelessness providers and the state governments, and so is subject to any decisions it takes. It may consider whether or not it makes an early announcement, but there have been no decisions yet.
Mr. Pratt, are you aware that at least one jurisdiction is working on the basis that there will be no further funding?
No, I didn't know that, Senator.
I was aware of that.
Is it more than one? Sorry, can I just finish?
Did I hear you correctly that there was no funding in the forward estimates?
Correct, Senator.
So if there's no funding in the forward estimates, the previous government did not plan to fund the National Partnership Agreement on Homelessness, or did not fund the future of the National Partnership Agreement on Homelessness?
Senator, the agreement...
If there's no money in the forward estimates, you can't have a plan.
well, Senator, the agreement that we've got is a one-year agreement. So it was a transitional agreement. And yeah, correct, there was no provision in the forward estimates. So the process we're going through now is essentially to, government's considering.
So if one jurisdiction is, working on the basis there's no funding, that's not really a revelation, because the budget papers probably make it very clear that there's no funding available.
I think it's reasonable. I mean, making a political point and using an officer is a little
I
bit
think it's
low.
I think the subtext of what we hear is, the government's got no plans on homelessness. Well, actually, the previous
Smith,
government
could you
had no
direct
money for plans on homelessness.
I think the Minister has something to say here.
I think it's a fair point that Senator Smith is raising
Surprise.
about the fact that there wasn't provision in the forward estimates.
But I think to say that the former government had no commitment to homelessness is
There was no
Just
money
Just
for
wrong.
homelessness. That's right. No money.
But
So Senator
Hello,
McLucas, have you
commitment.
Pratt,
really
I was
finished
just
your
sort of-
questions?
you were-
Because I
you
think
were trying
Senator
to-
Selja has some here too.
you were trying to come back to me about my observation of the state.
I had
you
just completed my observation on your observation.
Thank you very much.
So,
I have one more question about staffing.
but can we finish homelessness, the National Partnership Agreement first?
It's
I think,
around that.
okay,
I
sorry.
just wanted to ask Mr Palmer, the 50 people who used to work in this area now to 24, was that housing and homelessness or just homelessness?
It was homelessness and analysis in relation to housing. Some of those people have moved into the housing branch. So as I was just reflecting on my numbers here. In addition to that, the department's restructured some of the way it handles programs. So previously we directly managed programs out of the group that's now handed out of the program office.
Yep.
So it's a very difficult chalk and cheese.
And my final,
But we couldn't
Comparison.
say that, the staffing numbers looking after homelessness have halved or something. That would be completely erroneous.
I think half would be a clear overstatement, yes. I'm just saying in my branch with a different set of functions. So it's a very
and Mr Palmer,
complicated comparison.
the type of officer, are they policy officers or are they managing the project work? I think you're saying they're not.
It's largely policy officers. We only have a couple of small programs in respect of homelessness that the Commonwealth directly manages, and they'd be the Reconnect program and the Home Advice program.
Thank you. I'm
That's staffing.
finished on
Senator
homelessness
Selja.
as an NPA.
Thank you. I just want to follow on from Senator Smith's questioning. So we've established that there was no funding beyond 30 June 2014. Were there any agreements in place under the former government to continue funding for the National Partnership on homelessness? Is there any agreements with the states or any other agreements that would be relevant to continuing funding beyond 30 June?
No, Senator. There's, as Mr Palmer explained, there's obviously homeless services funded in the ongoing NAHA, the National Affordable Housing Agreement.
Sure, no, I'm talking about National Partnership
No,
Agreement.
the National Partnership Agreement, I think there's no agreements.
Okay, so there was no funding in the budget estimates, there was no agreements. Was the department asked to brief the former government about the future of the National Partnership Agreement on homelessness?
Sorry, Senator?
Was the department asked to brief the former government about the future of the National Partnership Agreement on homelessness?
I might sound a little bit like a broken record on this, but certainly we briefed the former government on lots of issues to do with housing and homelessness. But beyond that, the convention is, of course, that we don't talk about what we discuss with governments, current or future or past.
That's fine. Was there any plan whatsoever for a forward plan for National Partnership Agreements on homelessness beyond 30 June 2014 that you're aware of? Was there anything that we can point to that suggested there was a plan to take it beyond when it expired?
The answer to that question.
Well,
I
no.
actually think that's quite an inappropriate
It's
question.
not an
Senator
inappropriate
Lucas, the
question,
question was-
and the Labor Party's policy statement on it's irrelevant because we're talking about what they were doing as a government not as a political party making a statement in an election.
We've been talking today about a national partnership agreement on homelessness
First
that
one.
has no
Introduced by
money,
Labor. We're
that
very
has no
proud of
money
it.
in the forward estimates, and doesn't
Very
even
proud
have
of it.
agreement with other jurisdictions because there's nothing to agree.
So if we can just, before I was
Minister
cut off,
has
before I
just
was
said
cut
he
off,
has not.
I'm surprised just
Senator McLucas and Senator
If you want to blow
Smith,
this one up,
excuse me,
we'll play
Senator Seselja has the call.
I note the sensitivity of Labor senators, but I
I'm
didn't get...
sensitive because you're asserting that our government did not have a commitment to homelessness.
I'm
and
trying to
that
get to the
is
bottom of it. If you
fundamentally
did, you can evidence it, and this is what I'm asking the officials.
Well, as Senator Siewert has said, 40 organisations in Western Australia private providing 80 services, and you did not have a plan. You did not even have a future funding plan.
let's go outside.
Senator-
We'll have an argument.
Take it outside.
Or we'll come here.
I haven't seen that in estimates before, Chair, where someone asks to
You've
take
only-
it
you're
outside.
only- you're
I'm new.
I
This is-
decline because it would not be very senatorial.
I don't think it would be,
Well,
but
I
what
can
would be...
imagine, Senator
This is not the
and
place for
Senator
political
Smith, that
points.
you're very intimidated by that
What
offer
would
of
be-
Senator McLucas. But could we
What-
please get back
Indeed.
to Senator Seselja asking questions
So what
of
would
the
be,
officers
what
and
would
the
be
minister?
far more parliamentary and helpful would be if I could get an answer to this question that Senator McLucas has interrupted on a number of occasions. So just to recap, we didn't have any funding for the forward estimates. There were no agreements in place. And finally, was there any plan whatsoever that we can evidence that the former government had a plan beyond 30 June 2014 for the National Partnership Agreement on Homelessness?
Senator, the best way I can answer that, I think, is to say, firstly, I wouldn't want to speculate on what the former government proposed for the future, because I don't know. What I do know is that the National Affordable Housing Agreement has ongoing funding set aside for homelessness, and that we had funding for this financial year for a transitional homelessness national partnership. Beyond that, there is nothing else.
There is nothing else. Thank you very much.
You're right, Senator Seselja.
I'm all done. Thank you.
Okay, Senator Moore, did you have a question here?
Process. Can I just, Mr. Pratt, can you repeat just what you said then about the transitional process in terms of the funding went through until the end of this financial year? And 7 months ago, before the election, there was a transitional arrangement through until that time while discussions and things went on pending the election. I'm just wanting to see exactly what you said, because I'm sorry I missed the wording, because I want to get your exact statement.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, you haven't got to get word by word. I don't want to put pressure on you. I'll read the Hansard as well, but what was the answer?
Basically, I was attempting to answer the Senator's
Yes.
question by outlining what we in the department did know.
Yes.
So there were 3 points here. One was that, of course, it's not appropriate for us to speculate on what the former government might have proposed to do in this area.
Yes.
Secondly, what we did know was that we had the National Affordable Housing Agreement, which, as Mr Palmer has provided evidence on, has an ongoing set of funding for homelessness purposes. And thirdly, we had the funding for this financial year for the transitional national partnership on homelessness. That's where we were at.
So the transitional plan had funding through until the end of June 2014.
That's right.
And in terms of planning forward, in terms of process, there are often times where governments have a kind of holding pattern in terms of process in transition. Is that an unfair statement?
Well, that may be the case. I mean, again, without wanting to be inappropriate here, because I do have some ideas about what the former government was thinking in this area.
Sure.
And that didn't necessarily translate into a continuation of a national partnership in this area.
Yep.
But those were decisions for the former government to make if it was returned to government.
After an election.
Really, all I can say is that what we do know, which is the Affordable Housing Agreement and the partnership which ends at the end of this financial year.
And one last question, just to clarify the end. When was that transitional plan put in place?
That was organised in either late 2012 or early 2013, from memory.
I think the announcement was made in late 2012 and the negotiations occurred in early 2013.
And the money provided when?
The money flowed over the following
Does it
financial
get
year.
flowed? Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Senator Siewert and Senator McLucas.
Yeah, I've got quite a bit to do.
Okay.
Can I
So
put one on
we've
notice?
got
Hey?
half an
Put something
hour.
on notice?
No, I want to put a lot of it.
No. Can I put something on notice? Yeah.
Yeah, no, Senator Siewert, if you want to start off.
Okay.
We've got half an hour.
Well, I know this one will need to go on notice because I'm presuming that you won't be able to supply the information that I'm asking for. But could you please provide on notice the list of homelessness programs in each state and territory, and if you have them, how many people those programs, each of those programs, employ?
Senator, the list of services under the National Partnership Agreement on Homelessness is available on the Federal Financial Relations website.
All the programs?
All of the programs.
That are funded in each of the states?
In each of the states.
With the number of people that are employed in each of
It does not
those?
contain the number of people that are employed.
Do you know that?
No, we don't have the direct relationship. The states and territory governments have the direct relationship, so we wouldn't have that information.
Okay, thank you. One last question, and that is, I understand Senator Ludlam asked you last time about the previous government's goal of halving homelessness by 2020, and at that stage the response was that you don't have a target-based approach. I'm wondering, has there been any update from that process about whether you have a goal, if the new approach will include a goal of reducing homelessness by a certain amount?
Minister, I think this was discussed last time, and we indicated that the government doesn't favour the targets-based approach that the previous government had. And one of the reasons for that is that there are some issues with the very targets and the way in which we measure them. So one of the issues, my colleagues can go into more detail, is that in measuring, the more money we put in and the more servicing we do of homeless people, the more people are seen by those services. That actually inflates the count that the ABS uses, I think, of the number of homeless people. So in some ways, the more we do, the worse the problem looks in a target-based sense. And so we've got some issues with the way we've got some issues about measurement in this space. So I think my honest answer to you would be that you could have a target-based approach and you could try and measure that. I don't think we do a very good job in being accurate or getting a real answer for people to be able to say we've done better or we've done worse. That's the problem we face in this space. And it's an area where I think, despite a lot of investment by the ABS and others over the last 10 or 15, 20 years to try and better measure what we're doing, we still don't do a very good job in the space. So the Minister's outlined in relation to housing more broadly that he wants to take a supply-based approach. So he wants to go and look at the issue of can we objectively measure increases in the supply of housing? So this is broader than just social housing and broader than low-income housing. Map the supply, and can we get to a framework where we're more or less incentivising with the states and territories real increases in the supply of housing, which then deals with some of the problems we've got in terms of the supply of affordable housing. So I think he's coming at it a slightly different way to the previous government's approach, and it's broader than a homelessness approach.
I'm reluctant to take any more time, but I'm wondering how you then what'll be your key indicators of success, or how do you measure?
So, I'm probably paraphrasing the Minister here, but I think his definition of success and on the basis on which he'd want to reward states would be increases in the supply of housing and affordable housing in each state and territory over and above what is currently there, because that's the one way we know that we're going to reduce the number of people per dwelling. We're going to reduce pressure on, people finding affordable rental accommodation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the way.
Thank you.